There's the mayor.
All right, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to the Special Planning Committee of Wednesday, June 23rd. Now, the first item is the minutes of June 8th are here for adoption. Were there any errors or omissions?
Move adoption.
Move. Second. I'll call the question. Oh, sorry. Councillor Hobbs, you have a question?
No, sorry, my mistake.
All right. I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Were there any items to add to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to, the next committee meeting will be July 6th at 4 p.m. in council chambers. Item number 1, application by Kenneth Kim Architecture, Inc. for rezoning at 6500 Cooney Road from the low-density townhouses RTL1 zone to the parking structure townhousing ZT93 Brickhouse City Center zone. Mr. Craig and Mr. Badgel, and for committee, we do have Mr. Kenneth Kim, Mr. Kevin Liao, Mr. Anthony Ho, and Mr. Brian Chow. For the applicant, they are available for questions. Staff.
Thank you, committee. The staff report before you today is for a development in Brighouse Village at the corner of Cooney Road and Cook Road. Some brief highlights are that the proposed 4-story building fronts Cook Road and consists of 6 townhouse units, including 1 convertible unit, over a partially enclosed parking structure. A site-specific zone is proposed to accommodate the development, including a maximum floor area ratio of 1.2 and a maximum height of 15 meters. The staff report includes a revised proposal. The original rezoning application staff report was considered at the public hearing held on April 18, 2011. Given the passage of time, the staff report includes a recommendation to abandon the original zoning amendment bylaw. The originally envisioned shared access arrangement along the site's north property line and the neighboring townhouse development to the north to provide a shared lane access servicing both sites is no longer proposed, as the existing townhouse's driveway has not created any operational impacts to Cooney Road. The proposed development will have its own vehicle access to the proposed new lane. 2 city elm trees along the site's Cook Road frontage will be retained and protected, including the requirement for registered arborist supervision and a tree survival security. Retention would require special considerations for lane and sidewalk designs, which will be detailed through the required servicing agreement. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? Councillor Day, your hand was up, but it's gone now. All right. Any other questions from committee? Okay, seeing none, there is a recommendation in the package. The recommendation has been moved and seconded. Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Item number 2, application by Zhao XD Architect Limited for rezoning at 9200, 9220, 9240, 9260, 9280, 9300, 9320, and 9340 Francis Road from single detached RS1E to townhousing ZT94 Francis Road, Broadmoor. And we do have Mr. Xiaodong Zhao available for questions. Mr. Craig and Mr. Rockerby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this application does involve the construction of 25 townhouse units, 3 of which would be secured as convertible units. A site-specific zone is contemplated for this application, the purpose of which is to address the shallow lot depth and to set a consistent set of expectations for future developments, which would have the same constraints as this one. The proposal involves the retention of 11 on-site trees. 3 of those are large trees that are located in the amenity area, and that amenity area has been specifically located on the site to enable retention of those mature trees. The application does respond to several recent council initiatives and policies. The new sidewalk will be 2 meters in width, consistent with recent council policy. As well, we will be securing a legal agreement restricting the strata's ability to pass bylaws restricting the age of occupants or the ability of owners to rent out their units. Happy to answer any other questions about this application.
Thank you. Questions from committee? I don't see any. Questions from committee? The recommendation has been moved and seconded. Thank you. Still see no discussion. I'll call the question on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Item number 3, securing market rental housing in new development and increasing low-end market rental lemur contributions. As committee can see in their package, there's 3A, 3B, 3C, and I will turn it over to Mr. Hopkins and Ms. Nikolic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to provide a brief overview of the 3 reports that are in front of you today regarding the baseline requirements for market rental and low-end market rental housing in multifamily residential development. The first 2 reports in your agenda, items 3A and 3B, were tabled from the May 4th Planning Committee meeting. The recommendations in those reports have not been changed. We've also included a supplementary report, which is under item 3C, which recommends further enhancements to the market rental housing policy, provides clarity on questions that were brought up at the May 4th Planning Committee meeting, and summarizes the consultation that staff have had with stakeholders. At this point, I will ask Ms. Nikolic to provide an overview.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to provide a brief summary of the recommendations included in the companion report. The recommendations in the report that are items 3A and 3B on today's agenda are a coordinated response to housing-related referrals. They include specific recommendations to enhance the city's rental housing policies, including introducing a citywide requirement to secure market rental housing in new multifamily apartment developments that include more than 60 apartment units, with an associated density bonus applied to the site, and expanding the low-end market rental, or lemur, requirement from 10% to 15% of the residential density for sites that are inside the city center area plan. Additional recommendations include updates to the lemur program cash in lieu rates and recommended community amenity contributions for new townhouse developments with 5 or more units and for new apartment developments with 5 to 60 units. The staff report included on this agenda as item 3C includes recommendations to clarify the recommended citywide approach to securing market rental housing units and expanding the lemur program. It also includes consideration of incentives associated with the provision of market rental housing and brings forward a recommendation that staff be directed to review and provide a suggestion and suggest recommendations regarding the feasibility of reducing or waiving development cost charges for affordable housing in new development. The report also clarifies the variable density bonusing approach to securing market rental housing, which steps up the density bonus as additional rental housing is secured and includes provisions to consider additional density on a site-specific basis if an application exceeds the provision in the proposed market rental housing policy, both for mixed tenure proposals and for 100% purpose-built rental projects. The recommendations included in the reports are based on review of market rental and affordable housing initiatives in nearby municipalities, the findings of a financial feasibility analysis that was undertaken by an economic consultant from GP Rollo and Associates, and supplementary consultation with key stakeholders. The recommendations included in the companion reports attached as items 3A and B, which are further clarified in the report attached as item 3C, would enhance and clarify the city's rental housing policies at the same time as introducing a mandatory approach to securing market rental housing units in developments that include more than 60 apartment units and expanding the low-end market rental program and cash in lieu rates. Thank you. Staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. And for committee, there are some pieces of correspondence. We had one from the Richmond Home Builders Group that was in our mail. On table, we have correspondence from UDI, Vanprop, John Roston, and I believe that's it. That's it. All right, I'll open it up to committee for questions. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the copious work you've done on it. But I'm going to make my comments here. Where specifically in the report does staff feel that the report is good enough to encourage the building of rental and market rental? Where's the carrot within these three reports, basically, that there isn't a carrot to hopefully ask a developer or builder to build rental?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, the carrot in many ways is density. I would say there's three carrots. There's density bonusing, parking reductions, and certainty in the development review process. With respect to density bonus, we have a baseline density bonus. If you provide a mandatory 10% market rental, you get a 0.1 FAR. If you wish to provide more, we can negotiate that on a site-specific basis. And the same also goes for a proposal for 100% market rental. There is a density bonus in place in the policy for a 0.2 or 0.25 FAR. But if one wished to have 100% market rental and include affordable housing units in there, we could also negotiate increases in density, and that will be clarified through this policy.
Okay. I don't see that, but I don't think the incentives, and I've asked for incentives for committee to consider, and the city to consider in terms of affordable building market rental housing. If the incentives were there, I think people would be coming forward, but obviously they're not in droves, and we have a problem. It's my suggestion, and I think staff know what they're talking about, in my opinion. But when I look at some of the things in terms of the density bonus, I don't think that's enough from my point of view. When I look at some of the current rates of charging for homeowners, et cetera, in some of the reports, and per square foot doubling it, et cetera, I think through the chair, it's my suggestion for us to understand it as a committee and also a council, that we possibly have a workshop on this, and to really understand it and set up the plan that council and the vision that council has for what it sees in the community. Because from what I'm seeing is we have issues addressed, but I don't know where I'm going with it. I don't know what my goal is each year to see, and I'm talking about committee now. I'm not talking about staff, okay? I'm wondering where we're going, and when I look at some of the things that we're doing in here, all it's doing is adding another $40,000 to $100,000 on a cost of a home or apartment, et cetera, in terms of dealing with what's out there. But I don't see us getting into the rental area. We've got a couple, yes, we've got a couple of benevolent people along the way, but I think we have to do better. The only thing we have to give away is density, if you wish. And I think we've got to make it in such a quantity that people are willing to come forward on it. We did get some correspondence from various people that have questioned it. I know everybody is selfish and wants to worry about their own. I'm more concerned about the vision of the community and the city of Richmond, and not any one particular development, because everybody's trying to protect their own turf. I want us to be able to have a policy that is applicable to all and is one the city can live with, and committee can live with and we establish, so that we can encourage on it. I see this at Metro Vancouver in the same way, sitting on the housing committee, what other communities are doing. We tend to be putting a Band-Aid on market rental, low income, et cetera, but we're really not getting to where we need to be. We've got 2 million people coming in the Lower Mainland in the next 10 years, according to Metro Vancouver. Harold can back me up on these numbers. I don't know where they're going. I don't know where they're going to live, other than tent cities along the way, because there aren't any units, and there aren't any coming at the time. So I'd like to hear what other members of committee say through the chair, but it's my suggestion. I'm not sure I totally understand everything that's there, and it's my suggestion that we have one shot at this, and it's got to be done right. We're looking at things, we're reviewing it. I understand we're going to be reviewing the OCP. We've got little alcaves. I'd like to see a policy such that is standard across the board, not one for Seafair and one for Spires Road or North Richmond. If we're going to charge X number, I'm not sure we have the answer yet on the number for low income either. It's great to say 10 to 15. I'm not sure what that number is and what the implications there are, because in city center it's 17.9. So we're not doing 15. Maybe do we cut them back to 15? I better not say that too loud. So I guess that's where I am right now with this. We've got the basis of the work. It's all done. Staff have done a good job in putting it forward. But in terms of supporting it, as was said, A and B, there's no change. I think we need to look at it closer as a committee and then as council, because I don't think we know where we're going. At least I'm speaking for myself, and I think, as they say, greater minds always prevail, but from my perspective, I'd like to see us start putting things out there. I can't justify, for example, in one of the reports where we're doubling the proposed fees for city center, for example. Maybe there are reasons, but I don't understand those reasons, and I need to have that squared out, because we're looking at anywhere from 100 to 150% increase. So those are the things we go, and I think we can offer more in terms of density if we've got people on it. If they're prepared to play ball with us, I think we should be going higher. And something else I think we should be looking at is the height restriction. Instead of 4 stories, we should be doing 6 or 7 in certain areas. And we haven't had that discussion. That would be part of the OCP discussion, I guess. And I also believe we should be doing towers in the downtown core. Maybe we've made some mistakes, but I think there's opportunity now to correct it. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm not going to move anything, and I listen to debate from everyone else. Thank you.
Mr. Ersick, did you want to weigh in here?
Madam Chair, yes, if I may. Just a couple of brief comments pertaining to what we just heard. The first thing I would say is we are not fundamentally changing everything. And what is being recommended to you is stuff that's already been working and that is being tweaked and adjusted. We were asked very clearly as a staff by council to take a look at increasing the LEMA rate of provision from 10% to something more. We are recommending, after looking carefully at the economic analysis, an increase from 10 to 15% in city centre only. We were also asked to look at your current market rental policies. They actually work very, very well. Since you adopted those policies, you have approved literally hundreds of market rental units, which are either under construction or are on their way to be constructed. So again, this is not something brand new that you don't have experience with. Your market rental policies now are incentive-based and voluntary, so a developer can opt in or not. We were asked to look at making that a mandatory approach. We've done that, and we are recommending, notwithstanding that the existing voluntary policy is working quite nicely, we are recommending that we move to a mandatory approach, because in a lot of the discussion on developments that a development that was being referred back, there was a desire expressed to move to a mandatory approach. So we've evaluated that, and we think it's completely doable. You will be leading the region, quite frankly, but we think it's completely doable. And there are a host of incentives: extra density, reduced parking, certainty, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that I would say regarding density and giving away more density is the approach and the limits that the staff have laid out pay a lot of attention to not completely changing the character of neighborhoods and running the risk, the city running the risk of having neighborhoods opposing development. There was a proposal recently in a neighboring municipality where people could, or developers could, go from 2 and 3 stories to 12. And that sort of change in height and density raises a lot of concern. So the density increases and the height adjustments are relatively measured so that we don't create that sort of uncertainty in our neighborhoods and that sort of concern. But certainly on a development by development basis, if there was merit to going beyond the suggested density, that could be looked at on a case-specific basis. So I do understand that it's quite a big package and it looks complex, but virtually all of it is stuff that we're already doing and we're well experienced at doing. And I'm happy to, staff would certainly be happy to do a workshop, but I would remind you that the referrals were made to staff because we had a development on the table, which was referred twice. And so if we're going to flag this until the OCP review, which we expect to begin next year, or if it's going to be referred to a workshop, then I think committee and council will need to give some thought about how you're going to treat the applications that are already in the door, and also have, one of them that has already been to planning committee a couple of times.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the report. It's very intense. I've been reading it for days, trying to understand it all. And thank you for staff. I talked to John Hopkins earlier today for clearing up quite a bit of things. When I look at the chart on PLN 149, it shows that Richmond has the lowest rental household in Vancouver.
Councillor Day, you're a bit muffled. Can you speak
Sorry,
directly?
Carol. Let's see if we can fix it up here. Can we?
No, it's her, and it's at her end.
Is it your end? Okay. Sorry.
If I talk really close? No? Okay. You know what? I'll
That's
get
better.
off.
That's better. Right
That's
there
better.
is good. Right there.
Don't move.
Sorry. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
can't wait for this to be over, I tell you. So the chart on 149 shows that Richmond has the lowest rental households in Metro Vancouver. So I am concerned that we're obviously haven't been doing enough. So I'd like to ask staff to respond to the 2 primary questions from Zamstop and UDI who sent us letters. They really want to know that there's the option, if they have more lemur units or other rental units, for reducing the parking. Staff just said that that's something that they would negotiate. What would that look like?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can deal with that.
Please go
The
ahead.
starting point for rental housing, and John can certainly jump in here with more specifics, but in Richmond, the starting point, the parking rate for rental housing is already considerably less than for market-based housing. So going into the discussion, we have different and lower parking rates for rental housing than we have for other types of housing. So that has to be acknowledged, and that's a bit of a no-brainer, because we know from experience that there isn't a need. There's a lesser need for parking in those types of developments. What we are saying as a staff is that over and above that, we are quite happy to look at even lower parking rates in rental projects, provided that site by site an analysis shows that that's not going to create any problems. And so that's a very typical way of approaching parking. We start with a much lower rate, and if a developer can demonstrate through a parking study that further reductions are warranted, then we would be quite willing to look at that and recommend that. What we don't think is advisable is to just grant those further reductions across the board, because it's going to depend on the type of rental project. It's going to depend on the size and the number of bedrooms and the likely occupants, and it's going to depend on the location vis-a-vis the Canada Line or bus routes, that type of thing. So the parking, I think, frankly, is a bit of a non-issue. Our rates are already considerably lower for rental housing, and we're willing to look at lowering them further based on a site-by-site assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Erfsit. The other question that came up was, if there's affordable housing, they would like to see reduced DCC's development cost charges. What would that look like in a negotiation?
Sure, I'll tackle that one too. That is something that the city needs to study before you start granting that development by development. At least that's the staff opinion. And the reason for that is you have a development cost charge program, and it's very carefully prepared. It identifies all of the infrastructure that's required to support development, and then it strikes a contribution rate, a DCC amount, that is enough to pay for all of the required works. And so if the city is prepared to waive development cost charges for some forms of development, that money needs to be made up from elsewhere. And so what we're saying is the development community has raised this flag and said, hey, we think you should take a look at this. As a staff, we're saying, yes, we agree. And the place to do that is when our finance division reviews the development cost charge program, which is about to commence. So we think that you should take a comprehensive look at that, because if you start waiving DCCs for some projects without addressing where the shortfall is going to come from, then you're not going to be able to fully fund your program, and you'll have to use general revenue, sort of property taxes, to pay for DCC items.
Another item that was brought up, to allow builders to retain low carbon district energy systems. I don't quite know what that means. Can you explain that to me?
Madam Chair, I can explain that. And if we're going to, I should say that if we're going to get into the details of this, then we should move to an in-camera session, because it affects the utility, the district energy utility, but at a high level, the city practice has been for a considerable number of years that when a development goes ahead that's within the district utility area, large developments, they build what is called a low carbon energy plant within that development. and they transfer the ownership of that to the Lulu Island Energy Company at no cost. So in many ways, it's no different to a developer building a road at their cost to support development. So I don't blame them. The developers always like to cut their costs if they can. So basically what they're asking you to do is to give them relief from something that they've been actually doing for years. And I think it's a cheeky ask, but I wouldn't, I don't think that it's a deal breaker in terms of these policies working. And as a staff, I would not recommend that you do that.
Just one more question, Madam Chair. So on PLN 139, it mentions that these rules apply to only 60 unit or less developments. What if a developer comes along and decides to be cheeky and does 259 or 359 units? How would you deal with that?
Through the chair, perhaps I'll deal with that one too. I'm on a roll here. I think that if someone was trying to be too cute by half, we should just call them on it. And at a staff level, if somebody had a site that supports, say, 130 or 120 units, if they wanted to break it up into two blocks of 59 or 58 or something like that, at the staff level, we would call foul on that, because what the strength of your policies are that they apply equally or as equally as possible to all development. So if you allow people to do an end run and get away with it, it undermines your policies. So at the staff level, we would not support that. I think at the council level, you wouldn't support it either, because all of these projects require a rezoning. And I think that, I don't recall the detail, but I think we had a project in Hamilton that was kind of just under the threshold and a few years ago, and they were told, regardless, you need to build the Lima units. And you can do that because you have control of the zoning.
Thank you.
Councillor Liu.
Thank you, through the chair. I've looked at this a lot, and I really appreciate the work staff has done, because I appreciate this is exactly what we asked you for. Now it's our decision whether or not we pass it in its entirety, in portions, or what have you. I think some of us have heard some additional information from some people that make us maybe think twice or maybe consider some other things. And so, maybe it does make sense to sit back and have, a workshop on this. That being said, I fully support that the developments that are in this hopper, they should go forward on the rules that were there on the day that they applied. And most of them are going above and beyond, and they're actually meeting some of what we're asking for here already. So I think those ones should be moving forward. And I don't know if I need to make a motion for that, but I'd be happy to make a motion for that to let those move ahead. Because I think it is important to look at some of these other things that are happening. Someone mentioned the end users for this market rental. So who wants to be a residential landlord? What kind of stock are they looking for? Do they want it in one building? Talking to the people that run the Kiwanis Tower, they said that if they were able to come in at the beginning, they could have gotten 30% more units in there with the same footprint, the same building, essentially. They could have just rigged it differently and done a better job. So, if we're keen to get these units, these market rental units, are there certain people that want to run them and own them and build them? And does that make more sense? I'm thinking if we do phase this in, instead of just having a disincentive for developers, it'll get the developers that are still sitting on the fence as to whether or not they're going to get their application in. They're going to get it in right away, and they're going to move. So if we set this as a phase in, we move up to the 15%, say in 2 years, everybody who's sitting on the fence wondering what the heck to do, they're going to get those in, and they're going to provide some market rental. They're going to get some things done. Instead, a lot of people are just sitting on the fence waiting, and nothing's getting built. So I think there's some opportunity here for that. I'm old enough to remember when duplexes in Richmond were banned, when Richmond Council decided we shouldn't have duplexes anymore. And so you couldn't build duplexes anymore. So and if your duplex burned down, you weren't going to be allowed to replace it with a duplex. And now, of course, we want not only do we want duplexes, we want micro suites in them, we want townhouses, we want density. And so, you know, we've got to be careful about what we're asking for. And what we're asking for is what we want now and in the next few years, because in 10 years, this might all be different. And so slamming in a ton of market rental that's all hodgepodge in all these buildings might not have any market for it eventually. What I was also looking at is the rates. So when we're looking at these proposed city center rates, a townhouse at $18 a square foot. If you have a 1,500 square foot townhouse, so I have a townhouse about that big, and I scraped and saved and packed my sandwiches and, you know, found free parking everywhere I could so I could afford my down payment. Well, at $18 a square foot, you're adding $27,000 to the cost of that townhouse. You're adding $5,400 to the cost of that down payment. So you're increasing that person's down payment by $5,400. But in the same breath, though, and I know there's not very many spaces that this would actually happen, but for a house, so if you have a house you rezone, so obviously it's a big yard, you maybe split it in half. So now you're building a 2,500 square foot house, so $20, or you're at $8 a square foot on your 2,500 square foot house. So you get a bigger house, you're only getting hit with a $20,000 contribution into this affordable housing. So you're getting hit with much less than the guy trying to get into the townhouse. You know, if you're looking at someone trying to get into a condo, a 1,000 square foot condo that's family friendly, a couple bedrooms that maybe you can squeeze your family into, the city center, you're looking at an extra 25 grand. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money when you're trying to get your down payment together, an extra 5,000. And if you're outside city center, you know, those numbers go down a bit, but you're still pushing it primarily onto the more entry-level homes. You're not pushing it onto the big fancy home that's going to have the bigger uplift at the end of the day. So we're pushing it onto the little people that are trying to find affordability in the condos and the townhouses. You're not pushing it onto the bigger house. You can build a nice big house and you're still paying less than I am for my little townhouse. And then my other thought is, you know, in city center, don't we want to push for more multifamily? So shouldn't we be having slightly different numbers on our single families in city center? And so, and this is all workshop stuff where we have to sort of sit and grind the numbers through, and council has to decide for ourselves what kind of buildings we're trying to attract. I don't think we want single family houses in our city center area plan, and there's only a couple spots where they actually fit and might happen. We're really trying to encourage people to, you know, build a multifamily unit, a rental unit, a fourplex, or a whatever. And so I think that comes when we start really looking at our OCP. But putting these rules in now is just going to push those single-family houses along, and it's not going to get us what we want. So I think we should let the existing applications go through. I think we should put this on hold for a minute for us. We should have a workshop, and then we should look at a phased approach to how this comes in.
Councillor Steves. Councillor Steves?
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions of staff. And Councillor McNulty is aware of this. Metro Vancouver is working on a housing policy, and it came to our planning meeting in Metro Vancouver last week. It looks very much like this one. I was somewhat critical of it, but how does this compare with Metro Vancouver's housing policy that they're looking at? With the idea being that if the whole region adopts it, then we could all make it mandatory, because I don't like this negotiating back and forth. I think that it's so serious, and the population explosion we can expect in the future is in my mind, going to be quite incredible. And we should start now, and whether we start at 10% and 15%, it's going to go up to 15% and 20% and 20% and 25% very, very quickly. So how does this compare with Metro Vancouver, what they're looking at?
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, the proposed policy in the Metro Vancouver's draft regional growth strategy, I believe it suggests a 15% affordable housing baseline requirement. I think for us, we're proposing something that actually would exceed that. And I think it's going to be a stretch probably for some other municipalities to meet that benchmark. It's also, I mean, these policies through Metro Vancouver are more of a somewhat voluntary. I mean, it sets a benchmark, but they're not regulatory bylaws that we can put into place. But we certainly would exceed what their proposed policy is suggesting.
So it would be exceeding them, yeah, because I thought their policy was a little bit low. Okay, that's the only question I've got for now.
All right, and see no further questions at this point. We do have a couple of delegations. So the first delegation is John Roston. Mr. Roston? Hi, Mr. Roston.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and please identify yourself, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
So John Roston, representing the Richmond Rental Housing Advocacy Group. We've already made a written submission, so I'm just going to summarize it. We're asking that these reports be referred back to staff, and for four reasons. The first is that the rollover report that staff referred to, which basically discusses the financial viability of building rental housing, bases it all on the cost of land. So in reading the report, you quickly see that how much the developer has paid for land has a huge, huge influence on whether it makes sense economically to build rental housing or not. And what is missing from the staff reports is a situation that's going to be very common in Richmond, which is where you have an existing commercial or housing development, and the developer is adding new housing to that, on top of it, beside it, in the parking lot. So basically, there is no cost of land, or a very little one. And so that skews the whole formula in terms of what the Rollo report is telling you. And there should be special consideration given to those situations where obviously it's a lot more feasible to build a large amounts of rental housing. The second thing is the feedback we just got in the new staff reports, which is that it's far more profitable to have a building that's dedicated solely to rental. And when you look at the very large pension plans and real estate companies that are buying very large rental housing developments and who are in the business of running them very efficiently to keep rents down, you find that they're only interested in buying whole buildings. And so the question is, if somebody's proposing a development, is the land parcel large enough to have a separate building for rental? And if it is, the rental should be built. And if it isn't, then it makes more sense to have the developer pay cash in lieu and use the cash to build the rental housing elsewhere. So the developer doesn't have to be forced to build a separate rental housing building. But the fact is, if there's enough land to do that and make it profitable, then he should be required to build the rental housing. So that's number two. The third one is that we seem to have below 60 housing units and above 60 housing units. The fact is that there are huge economies of scale. So some of these projects we've been talking about with over 1,000 housing units have very different economies of scale from a building or two. So as the economies of scale kick in, it's far more economical to build rental housing, and more rental housing should be required, and that is not in the staff reports. And the fourth and final reason for referring it back is this whole business of grandfathering. So we have the Polygon Talisman, huge project, which caused you all to say we have to second think this. We shouldn't just be making a special case out of it. We should get a new rental housing policy and apply it to it so that we're being consistent and fair. And now the proposal is to forget all of that and grandfather it and not bother about any sort of new policy applying to it. So that makes no sense to us. What we are recommending is that staff should come up with this notion of land parcel size. So is the land parcel large enough to have a separate rental housing building? They should come up with a number that tells us that, yes, there is enough land to do that. The second thing is, we say that the amount of, and this is actually explained in the staff report, that the amount of rental housing that's required should be expressed as a percentage of the total floor area in the entire project. So staff go into a very cogent explanation of why it should be based on floor area, and then we head back to number of housing units, which they've just explained is not a very good way of defining how much rental housing there ought to be.
Your 5 minutes
And
is
I
up.
can add,
Can you, the 5 minutes is up. Can you just
I
wrap
can-
up?
I-
Thank you.
I can wrap up and say that if you read the written report, you can see we do provide specific recommendations for how much should be required in what type of project. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you. And Councillor Day, do you have a question for the delegate? You're on mute. You're on mute, Councillor Day.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Boston. We do have your letter here. Thank you so much for sending that. You mentioned that that we should look.
Sorry, it's me.
Me.
Sorry.
You,
Sorry, Carol.
Hang on just a sec.
What happened? I pushed to speak. What did I do? There we are. Thank you.
Okay,
Andy
please.
Andy and Bill are still not muted.
No, they are muted at this end.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Austin. Sorry for that delay. So you mentioned that developers have the opportunity for adding housing to existing residential units. Everything that I've seen so far, they want to demo the old existing units and start from fresh. Where have you seen this?
So we're talking actually mostly in terms of commercial developments. So it may be that they are demolishing, whether it be a commercial development or a housing development. It doesn't really matter if they're demolishing what's there. The point is all about land costs. So in other words, what's making the rental housing expensive is if they have to go out and buy the land today. But if the land is there, whatever kind of development is on it, then the cost of demolishing isn't what's important. It's the cost of it's really the cost of the land. And if you're asking about specific developments, as you drive around the city center, you see how many low-rise commercial developments there are. And so it is clear that what's going to happen over the next decade, that and many of those, partly due to COVID and the problem with making commercial developments profitable, is that you can see that what's going to make money in the future are really going to be larger developments with housing on top and commercial below. That's the only thing that's going to be viable. So many of these low-rise commercial-only properties in the city center are going to be redeveloped in that way in the future.
All right, thank you very much.
Councillor McNulty, you have a question for Mr. Ralston?
Yeah, if I can, Mr. Ralston, thanks very much for your presentation, et cetera. I guess I have a question of you in terms of wanting to build neighborhoods in balance. Do we really care how much a person paid for their land versus wouldn't it be nice to have a nice neighborhood and X number of units within that neighborhood? And if the developer made 5% or made 9%, does it matter to us if we get our neighborhood of 75 units or 275 units in a nice place where people can live and we have a quality of life? I guess what I'm trying to look at in terms of why would we penalize somebody that's trying to do, at the end of the day, I want to have units so people can live here. And whether you paid X dollars or Y dollars, so I'm just wondering how you would factor in and utilize land costs for units. I would rather have a policy on this will be the number of units depending on if you wish the total size of the land or the total bill, whatever we decide on, as opposed to what you paid for. I see it all in here, and it's good. And I realize what the roller report said as well, but I don't know how you would work that in. If I paid $2 million, I've got to give how many units? And if you paid $6 million, you only have to give the number of my units minus 5 or something like that. I'm just trying to figure out how that might work in, because we're going to have to give some direction along here somewhere.
Yes, it's a good question. And you'll notice that we're not suggesting that there be the number of, the amount of rental required is directly related to how much the developer paid for the land. So in other words, the fact is this an existing commercial or housing development that's being redeveloped so there's no new cost of land? Okay. Is really the question. Okay. If in fact the developer, and the reason for that is that if there is little or no cost of land, rental housing is going to be profitable in that development. So it's a yes/no question. If the developer is going out to buy land at today's prices for land, as the rollover report points out, then it's going to be very difficult to make rental housing profitable. So we're not trying to force people to build rental housing at a loss. Nobody's going to do that. So we're trying to make it yes/no, not is it an existing development where you're not purchasing little or no new land or not? So it's a very simple question, and it's not this thing, whether, as you said, did I pay $6 million or $10 million for we're not trying to make that distinction.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Roston. Our next delegate is Robin Glover. Mr. Glover, are you here? Oh, there you are. Thank you very much, and please identify yourself, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to delegate today. My name is Robin Glover of Polygon Homes. Over the last 30 years, Polygon has successfully completed more than 6,500 homes within the city of Richmond. Many of these homes have been delivered as LEMR units with successful partnerships with local organizations. And a key factor in our decision to continue to invest in Richmond is the clear policy framework that has existed here for decades. The proposed policies that are before you today, market rental and LEMR housing, will contribute to the overall availability of housing options within the city. Like it or not, the development community and the city are partners in the delivery of rental housing. It is our belief that an increased supply of all types of housing across Metro Vancouver will help to address the affordability crisis we are in today. The proposed increases to secured market rental and LEMR homes in the city center area plan are achievable, provided that 3 things are included. It is implemented incrementally, incentives are included, and early grandfathering of in-stream applications is provided. Every major policy change in the city of Richmond that has impacted the development community, such as STEP Code or the original LEMR policy, has always included these 3 mechanisms, which have encouraged advancement towards Richmond's housing goals. So first, an incremental approach. The proposed leap from a voluntary secured market rental policy to a mandatory one is significant and will impact the feasibility of many in-stream applications. Instead of a single jump, we would recommend that these changes be implemented over time.
Can you speak up a bit? Sorry, can you just speak up a bit? Thanks.
Sure, it would be, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Could you go back a sentence or 2, please?
Of course, yes, my apologies. As far as an incremental approach goes, the proposed leap from a voluntary program to a mandatory program is significant, and it will have an impact on the feasibility of many in-stream applications. Instead of a single jump, we would recommend that these changes be phased in over time. It would be a gradual approach that would provide the development industry with an opportunity to absorb that change. Secondly, incentives. The GP Rollo report dismisses incentives, such as parking reductions, amenity relaxations, and municipal fee reductions. And we appreciate that staff considered some of these items through their consultation process. The prospect of a DCC review is promising. However, we are disappointed that further parking reductions or even parking maximums near transit appear to be off the table. And finally, grandfathering. Of particular importance is the recommendation to grandfather in-stream applications. The rezoning process of a development site takes many years, with land acquisition occurring at project inception. To calculate the purchase price of a development site, it is critical to itemize all anticipated costs and deduct them from revenue to determine a project's viability. While the development community is prepared to accept market risks of increased construction or market pricing fluctuations, the cost of new policies introduced after a project makes its initial application are not reasonable, especially when the changes will have a significant negative impact on the outcome of the project. The province and the city of Richmond has a long track record of grandfathering in-stream applications when significant policy changes are proposed. The grandfathering policy allows the development community to incorporate upcoming changes into their project analyses and provides the certainty and transparency necessary for continued investment in Richmond. To summarize, we believe the proposed policies are supportable, provided a gradual approach, incentives, and grandfathering are incorporated in the final document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glover. Councillor Day, you have a question for the delegate? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Glover. When you say make the mandatory changes over time, what's the timeline you envision?
Well, it could be an incremental approach of 2 to 3% a year over 5 or 6 years. I think that is definitely something that could be workshopped. If I could add to that through the chair, the other piece, and I think Councillor McNulty alluded to it, it would be helpful to understand where this is all going. So well and good to understand an incremental approach to get to the targets that are before us today. What's the next target? It would be very useful in providing certainty to the development community to understand where this is going.
And one last question. We have a graph here that shows us that Richmond is at 26% renter households, as opposed to Burnaby at 38%. Just wondering, why do you think that is?
Why is there less rental in Richmond versus Burnaby?
Rental households, like if we're at 26%, Burnaby's at 38%, Coquitlam at 36%. Why do you think we have lower rental households? You're in the business of building. I thought you might.
I don't have any information on that, I'm afraid. We can certainly look into it and report back to you.
Good question of staff.
All right, thank you very much. There's no other questions for the delegate, but Councillor McNulty has a question for staff.
Just a quick question of staff, if I could. In terms of grandfathering, how many applications do we have in the hopper now, and what is the status of each of those, and how would this policy change them? I mean, maybe that has to come out on a memo.
I'm happy to tackle that question through the chair.
Okay.
In terms of in-stream applications involving more than 60 apartment units, there are currently 6 applications under staff review that have not yet proceeded through public hearing. Of those 6 applications, 2 are located outside the city center. The implication of applying the new policy to those applications would be the application of 10% mandatory market rental to those 2 applications. There are 4 active applications within the city center. 3 of those applications are currently taking advantage of the city's market rental incentive policies and providing market rental on their projects. The provision of market rental in those projects ranges from 7.5% to 10%. So there would be a marginal increase in market rental provided in those 3 projects. Those 3 projects are also providing 10% low-end market rental currently, so you'd see an increase in low-end market rental across all 6 of the projects if they were applied currently. In terms of those 6 applications, 55% of the dwelling units involved are encompassed in the Polygon Talisman application.
Madam Chair, if I may, in terms of if you moved ahead with the staff recommendations, the recommendations that have been put to you by staff would provide grandfathering for those applications. And so an application that is already in the door and complete and viable would be given a period of time, I think, Wayne, it's a year, to get to first reading under the current rules. And the current rules are 10% LEMA and voluntary incentive-based market rental. So the applications that are in the door would not be impacted if you accepted the recommendations before you. However, if you eliminate or change the grandfathering, what is being recommended to you for grandfathering provisions, then they would potentially be impacted.
And do you think that 1 year is achievable? What do we do now?
Through the chair.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Through the chair, in terms of recent policy changes, we have applied a consistent rule of 1 year from adoption of council policy to get to first reading.
So it's consistent with what our practice has been already. Great. Thank you.
In recent years, yes.
Councillor Liu.
Oh, I'm not.
Sorry. Councillor McNulty has another question.
So, Mr. Craig, so really these 6, are there others in the hopper that would be affected by it as well, which are smaller?
We have a number of applications that would be subject to a cash in lieu contribution.
Okay. Which is their choice.
Yes.
Basically.
I would also.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. I would also add, just for committee's reference, that in terms of your existing market rental incentive policy, we also have 4 purpose-built rental-only applications under consideration currently, involving approximately 750 units.
Sorry, how many units?
750.
Sorry, the 4 purpose-built ones are how many units under consideration? 50 units?
750.
I'm sorry. The acoustics are very poor in this room, Mr. Craig, as you can see. Thank you very much for that. Okay. All right.
Councillor Liu?
Thank you. Just a question for staff then. So if we adopt this, it would allow the grandfathering. However, it seems to me our current policy is to apply the rule of the day upon application. So the fact that we have sort of held up some of these guys for now has been our move ad hoc. It's not actually a rule, it's just something we've done. Is that correct?
Well, can you run that by me again? I'm not sure that I followed it.
Typically, if I come in, I'm going to build a building, I put in my application, the rules of the day, that day, are what apply to me that day. And so
Yes.
that should be what applies to all those people, all those 6 that are in the hopper. The only reason that they're not at this point in time is because we as a council have, like, on an ad hoc basis, just decided that we wanted to possibly change the rules on them midstream. But this isn't typically how we do business, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, I think it's fair to say that the debate, there has been debate around the original referral of the Polygon project. That I think it was referred back to staff on 2 occasions. There was also discussion of grandfathering when we brought the first 2 reports in the package today to you in May. And so, yes, as part of this particular discussion, there has been debate about whether grandfathering should be applied or not at the committee and council level.
But
as a staff,
is a new thing that we're talking
beg your pardon?
Well, this concept of grandfathering is like a new thing, because originally it would have been the rules of the day that applied, but
through the chair, the concept of grandfathering in Richmond is actually not a new thing. It's a practice that we've used for at least 15 years. And it comes into effect when, not when the policy is remaining the same for new applications, but when you're going to change, or when you make a change to the policy to make it more onerous or introduce a new requirement. At that point, Richmond has a deep history of providing existing applications, not future ones, but existing ones that are already in the door, a window of time to complete the application before the new rules apply to them. And that's because the developers, quite simply, they prepare their pro formas under the rules of the day.
Yeah, and the design, right? Like, we can't keep making them go back and redesign their building every 6 months.
So, I've said before, in Richmond, we've never tried to be the cheapest. This is not a race to the lowest common denominator.
No.
We have been comfortable with fairly onerous requirements, and the reason we managed to make that work without the development industry, getting all excited and developing somewhere else, is because we provide early notice and we provide grandfathering, so we're not pulling the rug out from under their existing project.
Okay, but this is actually suggesting that from here on in, we do change it. So originally what our policy has been is that once your application's in, what affected you at the time is how we're going to judge you on this project. And we're not going to make you rebuild it halfway through, right? What we're suggesting here, though, is we're only going to give you a year from when you get started. So if we then decide that we really like some trees and we want you to redesign the whole thing, then we can hold you up long enough that we can now put in a new rental housing policy too?
Through the chair, if I may, what staff are recommending is what we have recommended in terms of grandfathering existing applications. What we're recommending today is exactly the same as we have done for over a decade. And you can't be disingenuous about this stuff. Obviously, we would make best efforts with an existing application to move them forward within the 1 year that we're recommending be provided as a grandfather time.
Yeah, certainly staff is, but that doesn't necessarily mean the council will. So are we making sure that we're doing something that's transparent and fair?
What I can say, rather than speculate about what may or may not happen in the future, what I can say is that in the past, when we've moved the goalposts with new policy or requirements, and when we've provided a 1 year window to grandfather existing applications, it's worked just fine. I'm not aware of any complaints or anyone crying foul that, they weren't given a reasonable opportunity. And I think, if not all, the vast majority have moved ahead in a satisfactory way.
Okay, so this is not an effective change of policy, is what you're telling me.
It's not, what staff is recommending is not a change in approach to grandfathering, but clearly it is a change of policy regarding how much LEMA you have to provide, and it's a change of policy because the provision of market rental would go from being a voluntary thing that a developer decides to do to a mandatory thing that the city dictates.
Okay, but not a change in the approach of how long we give you to get it
No,
through.
through the chair, if I may again, what we're recommending is consistent with certainly what we've done while I've been in my position in planning, yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure, that we weren't truncating that in this situation with this new ruling. Okay, thank you.
And just a question on that point of the in-stream applications, perhaps besides Polygon, are the other applications still moving through the system, or are they stopped until, because I think that's some of the concern. Have they been making their way?
Through the chair, we are continuing to evaluate the proposals that are before us, and we'll continue to do so. The question of grandfathering is paramount to how those proceed to council, but in terms of the application review process, it is ongoing.
All right, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes?
If I may, so what Wayne is basically saying is that at a staff level, the technical review and discussions and negotiations, they continue. If there's work to be done, that work is being done. But I think the reality is that we have developers who are anxious about coming forward at this point in time. Until the city, until council resolves what the policy is, and if there is a change of policy, what the rules of grandfathering are, developers are very nervous about being put on the table right now.
All right, thank you.
And
Councillor Steves.
Yeah, thanks. We discussed this when we did Richmond Center, and if you remember, Richmond Center was already rezoned and grandfathered. We didn't accept that they would have the same as when they were rezoned, and we got more units. So even if it isn't grandfathered, I certainly wouldn't vote for Polygon at the existing plan, and I think that's our right. Is that not? In other words, we can negotiate more than what the requirements were when they applied by simply saying we're not going to support it.
Through the chair to Councillor Steves, yes, rezoning is a discretionary function. So even if something meets all of the policies of the day, you still have discretion to move ahead with rezoning or not.
Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the discussion and where we're going, not where we're going. I don't think we're going anywhere. That's what my concern here is. We're getting into specifics. We're talking about Polygon, which we should be talking about policy. And it's, I'm not comfortable with changing rules without a council plan and understanding the implications thereof, okay? I'll be quite frank with you. You know, it's great, staff have done a good job of putting it in paper, but I need to ask questions. When I see we're gonna give a 0.1 bonus, I don't know what the hell that means. Could it mean 50 units, 200 units, 1,000 units? What does 1.0 mean? I don't know that. And if other members of council know that, take me aside and smarten me up. I've only been in council a short time, but I don't understand it. My concern here is we need a policy, whatever it is, and we got to live with that policy. But I'm not sure this person, anyhow, doesn't understand the implications of all of what it means. I'm not trying to hold anything up. I'd like to look at the incentives. I've always asked for incentives before. I haven't heard how long, what kind of bonus we can give to fast track something that's totally rental or market rental, or if somebody comes along and says, I'm willing to build a 40-unit shelter, are we going to give them, it's going to take 3 years like everything else, or are we going to do it in 7 months so we can get people in it? I don't know. And what I'm trying to come back with, where I started out with an hour ago, is understanding the rules. We got the basis for them. And I'm not sure we want to rush into them and not get hung up on somebody's development out there, okay? And that's, I think Councillor Steves was thinking the same thing. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but I'm not gonna rush into it. If we have to grandfather somebody through or say, okay, go ahead under the old rules and technical, and then we vote for it and bring it forward, that's fine. But it still doesn't solve my initial question of understanding the whole policy, okay? It's great to think you do, and I'm not sure I do, because when I come to say somebody's got an FAR of 3, and I'd heard before, and I won't say where I got it, but a certain development got 4 on an FAR, never mind 0.1, but got a 4. And I tell everybody, if they ask me, well, you'll never get more than 3 along number 3 road. I say, yeah, but Jack over there got 4. Oh, really? Well, that's news to me. And I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm pointing, I didn't understand. How the hell did they get 4? Okay, so I guess that's where I'm coming from, Chair. And that's why I suggested earlier a workshop. We can continue along and work, and a workshop doesn't take long to put together, my goodness, and put our issues down and bring us all together to understand this and put this back on. It's easy to call a meeting. We have the prerogative of 24 hours. I mean, to sort of, if that's only if staff could get the documentation with due respect to staff, okay? We can have that kind of thing. So that's where I'm coming from. I want to see more incentives. What does fast track mean? What does priority mean? Well, you know, if somebody is going to build X, Y, and Z and want to sell the whole thing off versus getting people in, the reason we've got only 26% is we don't have any more things to rent. Folks, we don't have any spaces. Richmond is 0.1 for vacancy. Down in Minato Village, when they remodel a suite, that's where the 0.1 is. They move out till they remodel it. We just don't have the places, you know. So I guess, you know, it was brought up before, why only 26%? Well, there's your answer. There's no place to rent anymore. We'd have more renters, but you can't get it. You know, every time we have a development and somebody doesn't support a secondary suite or an encore of our coach house, we're turning families away from Richmond. And that's where I'm coming from on it. Now, I'm not ranting and raving. I'm trying to come back to understanding the whole policy. And I think we got 2 issues. I don't want to put grandfathering in this. That's a separate issue we can discuss one way or the other when we decide where the policy's going, what we've got is going. And then we can go from there. And I think in a week or so or 10 days, we can have all our questions answered and understood, et cetera. And we invite all of council to it, not just planning committee, and understand where we're going. And if we want to make resolutions tonight with regard to those in stream, fine. But that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, there's a couple. So you're suggesting referral. I will come back to you after there's
with
a couple.
Workshop.
Yeah, okay, I'll come back to you. Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I had some really good conversations with staff today, and basically that's how I came to understand what we're actually voting on today. From what I understand, you guys can jump in, the changes are actually quite minor. It's almost housekeeping. We'll go from rental being mandatory, not optional. Real simple. City center lemur go from 10% to 15%. And market rentals unchanged to 10%. Affordable housing, I believe, is unchanged at 15% for the city center. And on the outskirts, outside of Richmond City Center, everything pretty much stays unchanged at 10%. Mr. Hopkins, if you could let me know if I got that right. What I suggested today when we were discussing this is what we need is a really simple chart that breaks it down. The big problem is we have 3 very large reports that deal with a different piece, and we need to marry it all together in one chart in one simple explanation.
Through the chair to Councillor Day, that is correct. It's for the city center, we're talking about a 10% market rental requirement and a 15% lemur requirement. And outside the city center, it's a 10% market rental requirement and a 10% LEMA requirement. That is correct.
Ask a question?
Councilor McNulty, do you have a question to the comments?
Mr. Hopkins, this is great, okay? But what's the implication and what's the goal? How is this going to change Richmond tomorrow if we adopt it tonight? What does it mean? Sure, it's gone to 15%. I know exactly what you've asked for, but that's my question. What's it mean? You said in city center. How many units do we need in city center? How many units do we need outside? What's the neighborhood like? You know, this is what I'm trying to get. Do we need 5,000 units in city center? If that's the goal, then how do we get there? Maybe you need 18%, not 15%. I don't know what you need, but that's what I'm trying to get at. What is it going to look like? How close are we to our 160,000 people that we put in the city center a number of years ago when we put the plan in together? Remember, we were going to densify downtown. What are the possibilities? What are the options? How many more properties are there in city center? Maybe she would ask Polygon to build twice as many instead of what we're doing. That's what I don't know. It's great to put the policy down, but what does it mean? And that's all I'm trying to find out. I understand it as Councillor Day has put it out. I know what you're asking for, but I don't know what it means. And do we want that? Maybe one of the requirements is we have no cars a block away from the SkyTrain, and they get lifetime passes on the SkyTrain instead of a parking spot. Maybe that's something we put in, or a bus pass, or whatever, to go around. We talked about that one time about Concord up the street, you know, those kinds of things. So there's where I'm coming from. You've done great work up to now, but I'm pushing you one step further.
Councillor Hobbs.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Oh, Mr. Erceg?
I do agree the reports are, you know, sizable. But on page 141 of your package, there are two tables, and essentially they summarize, they show the existing policy and they show what is being recommended. And there's a table for within the city centre and a table for outside of the city centre. So that's your nutshell if you're looking for one.
But there's no numbers. Mr. Erceg,
On page
there's
141.
no numbers.
Well, Councillor McNulty, what it would mean is that the amount of LEMA in city centre that needs to be provided would increase by 50%. And it would also mean that the market rental housing provision would be mandatory at 10%, and not of units actually. An earlier speaker alluded to units versus floor space. It would be 10% of floor space. That's how we have always done this in Richmond. So, you know, that's what it would mean. Developments would provide 50% more LEMA units than under existing policy, and they would be mandated to provide 10% of their development floor space as market rental units. Now, how many units will that produce over time? I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. That is dependent on market forces. That is dependent on a whole bunch of things which are not cast in stone as we speak today. What I can tell you, though, is that your affordable housing strategy is unique, and it's produced over 1,000 low-end market rental units. And your rental housing policies existing, they've only been in place for about 2 or 3 years, but they have produced about 700 units. And as Mr. Craig pointed out, there's another 750, you know, coming. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you how many units will be produced by the policy. That is to be determined with time.
Councillor Hobbs.
Well, thank you through the chair. A lot of information, a lot of questions that have been informative as well. One thing that's apparent to me in reading through this material over the last couple of days is how much I don't know. But having said that, I think it's also clear that we all share a couple of common beliefs and goals, the creation of more housing options in Richmond, more affordability, more market rentals. I think everybody has spoken to that. So the goals are common. It's how we get to achieve those that seems to be part of the debate. One of the things that always concerns me in life, no matter what I'm dealing with, is kind of administrative and judicial and regulatory fairness and how things are applied, and actually what they are in concrete terms as well, but the application is important too. So I know that in anything in life, for builders and planners, for city people, predictability and certainty and fairness in the application of those rules is important. And I would be remiss if I didn't compliment staff on the amount of information and detail in these reports, because it's pretty immense. It brings me to one point about the grandfathering issue, and from what I've heard from staff and other people, it seems like that has been our practice over a good recent period of time. And just as an individual, considering what I've already said about procedural fairness, I think that's an important thing that we keep in mind. Now I'll get to an actual question, and that's when someone was talking about incremental progress towards goals, I think that's a worthwhile thing to consider rather than doing everything in one shot. And I can't begin to delineate all the different things we've talked about into separate goals because I don't have that all in my mind right now. But if we were to approach some things in an incremental fashion, when it comes to development and planning, first question is, what would be a period of time, and I apologize if somebody has already answered this question, but what kind of period of time would you be talking about in terms of incrementally, maybe a few percent at a time over the course of 3 or 4 years, introducing the market rental policy into the rest of Richmond outside the city center? And the other question I have is, one I've asked frequently in life is, what problem are we fixing? Because I've heard it described several times how well Richmond is doing with regard to Lemur and market rentals. And I know we're not doing well enough for some people, and you can always do better. I'm not arguing with that point. But we seem to be doing quite well, and Mr. Ersick, you just referred to the success of both the number of units through Lemur and the market rental. So I get how if you increase a percentage, it theoretically will increase the number of units you produce, but it seems that we are doing quite well. So those are the two questions: incremental time frame, and in a nutshell, what's the problem that you're trying to fix by increasing the percentages that you've already talked about? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, perhaps I'll tackle that. If Council were to decide that for instance, that the Lemur standard would increase from 10% to 15%, which is what staff are recommending, you could use pretty much any time frame. You could do it over a year, you could do it over 2 or 3 or 5, as long as you were clear. But while that may please some, there's a possibility it may not please others. The second question, what are we trying to fix? In my opinion, yes, the city Lemur policies and the city incentive-based voluntary market rental policies have been successful. I think by any objective measure, when you compare with what others have achieved, other municipalities, they have been successful. However, there were opinions expressed that they weren't doing enough. And so that's really at the crux of the issue. How much is enough? And so, yes, I think that they're successful. But there is and the reason that staff got the referrals in the first place was because there was the sentiment that it wasn't enough. And so what we're doing here is trying to find the sweet spot where everyone is comfortable with, the definition of enough.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from committee? Councillor McNulty, you had a referral.
Well, I thought that we should have a workshop on this, to be quite frank with you. And I would move referral of this process back to staff to conduct a workshop of committee within the next 10 days.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Did you want us to add anything to that?
I think I've spoken enough tonight. I'm not trying to postpone this or anything. I'm just trying to make sure that we've got our T's and everything crossed. And I'd like to have a discussion behind the scenes of the implication of incentives. I still think there's some opportunity here from my perspective. We talk about reductions and variances, et cetera, in single family and other things. What the implications are, I don't know all the implications. I may be totally wrong, but and that's fine. First to admit a mistake and what have you. But and we may want to increase the 15% to 17.5. I don't know. As I say, depending on where we are. But the one thing I would like to see is a commonality, and I think Mr. Hobbs hit it, fairness and predictability, that inside city center and outside city center, I don't understand why they should be different. Okay? A percentage is a percentage. And if we don't get as much outside city center, that's fine. But at least they know what they've got to work forward to. They've got to give up a unit. When I started all this when Raymond Cooner came along, he had to give up 3 units out of 14. And I think, I hope we give him 15% because then we got to give him one back instead. So and that was the original. That was with 5%. Never mind 15%. So anyhow, that's where I am on it, and I'm trying to be positive on this. I'm trying to be, this is a landmark thing. We keep saying we're a leader. Well, if we're a lead, then let's make sure that our policy is ironclad, and we actually do lead. And I think there are some things that we need to shore up, or at least understand better, at least from my perspective, and I'll let better minds prevail on that.
Mr. Ersick, did you have a question?
Madam Chair, we have people from our clerk's department and law here. There are some sensitivities around workshops. I think that what might be appropriate is to refer this to staff, and perhaps a direction for staff to hold a staff workshop, which members of council may choose to attend. So I think, we just need to massage that a little, so that we're staying on the right side of the track.
Yeah, I did mean that.
Yeah,
I said it the wrong way.
Clerks has that wording, wordsmith there. Thank you. Good idea. Councillor Liu.
Thank you. I support this. I think we many of us have some questions. We'd like to sort of run through a few of the permutations. We'd like to sit down with staff and sit down together to talk about some of the different options. I would, however, like to allow the groups that are sitting waiting for us to make a decision here to move through. I think we're all basically agreeing that the grandfathering clause makes sense, and I think these evidence, and this gives us an opportunity for them to possibly even be heard before we break for summer and get along. Otherwise, some of these groups have been sitting waiting for 6-8 months on their projects.
Now, I don't want to tie it to the workshop, so I think I'll come back to you as a separate referral. I don't want to tie it to the workshop. All right, thank you. Councillor Day.
I don't think, are you okay? Good? Thank you. I think that the chart that is on page PLN 141 is a good starting point. And I believe that between now and the council meeting, we would be able to expand on that chart and include everything, affordable housing and all of the steps. Because this chart, as Mr. Ersick pointed out, does clearly and concisely explain what we're doing. The changes are not dramatic. I've already gone over them once, so I'm not going to repeat them a second time. I think that if we continue to work with the developers and find incentives with them, we can continue to increase the amount of rentals. We've got quite a few in the hopper. Things are looking promising. So I'm not going to support the workshop, not because I'm not in favor of doing a workshop, but with COVID and everything else, it'll be so disjointed. I think what we're better off is to direct staff to come up with the answers to the questions that have been asked tonight and send them out as quickly as possible to all the councillors so that we can read them, call staff, ask the questions one-on-one, which is what I did today. It was very helpful, and then move along with this because, you know, I think that we have to keep the ball, kick it down the field. So I will not be supporting the motion. Sorry, Councillor Nelson.
I will be supporting referral and to have a workshop. I think anytime that we can get together out of a, and have a bit more information and have those casual conversations. I think some of these proposals are significant. I think a 50% increase is significant. I think the cash in lieu increases are significant. And I think the question Councillor McNulty asked about why is city centre different from outside city centre, I can understand it to a point, but they're quite a bit different, and the increases are quite a bit different, and so I need a little bit more information to understand. And I think if we can have that workshop, have a better understanding, I think it would be good for all of us and get a policy that we can all live with. So I'll be supporting referral. Any other speakers to referral? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried with Councillor Day in the opposition. Councillor Liu, you have another referral?
I'd like to make a motion that the applications in stream receive the grandfathering and are able to move forward while we go through the process of workshopping.
I'll second that.
It has been seconded. Is there any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried with Councillor Day and Councillor Steves in the opposition. Thank you. Now, the next item. Item number 4, supplementary information, Steveston Village Advisory Design Committee and Steveston Area Plan Review. Mr. Hopkins and committee will remember this as we had reached consensus at the last planning committee, but because information came later that the Richmond Heritage Commission needed to be amended by bylaw, and this is what's before us. Mr. Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have anything to add, but I would like to pass it over to Ms. Cynthia Lucier to highlight a few points.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ms. Lucier.
Through the chair, consistent with the direction provided at the June 8th Planning Committee, staff have incorporated terms of reference and member composition initially recommended for a separate Steveston Village Advisory Design Committee into revised terms of reference and composition for the Richmond Heritage Commission. As the chair mentioned, since the existing terms of reference and composition for the commission are contained within a bylaw, the necessary revisions are proposed in Amendment Bylaw 10280, which is included with this report. Staff proposed to report to Planning Committee in early fall with recommendations on selection of 3 members with experience in heritage conservation planning and design to fill the 3 current vacancies on the Commission, whose terms will end at the end of 2022. The proposed amendment bylaw would enable the Commission to continue operating with 9 members until the end of this year, when 6 current members' terms expire, and then staff will recruit only 3 new members at large for appointment to the Commission beginning in January, for a reduced Commission size of 6 moving forward. The report also contains a revised implementation strategy proposing that all relevant applications be reviewed by the revised Richmond Heritage Commission after the current vacancies have been filled with the new design members. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. Any questions from committee?
I think they hit it on the nose. Move the recommendation.
Recommendation has been moved and seconded. Seeing no, Councillor Steves. Councillor-
thanks. I think I may have mentioned this at the last meeting, but I'm not sure if I did or not. But we discussed this at the Sea Island Community Association meeting a week or two ago. And the way I read it, a broad-based committee like this through the Heritage Commission would also include areas like Sea Island. They've been looking at what's been happening in Steveston, and they like what they see, and they'd like to see some recognition of the heritage of the Sea Island, Birchville area. And I think they'll probably be wanting to put a presentation together to somebody sometime in the future to see what they can come up with. So I think as I read it, this would cover them too.
That's great. Councillor Day.
Through the chair.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Lucier.
Oh, through the chair to Councillor Steves. Yes, you're correct. The Heritage Commission reviews applications and initiatives citywide, not just in Steveston Village.
Great.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited about this change. I think it's a positive change, but I had a question of staff. 3 of the 6 new members must have experience in, development, basic or heritage, and be in good standing with the BC Association of the Heritage Professionals, the Canadian Association of Heritage, or the Architectural Institute. How likely is it that we're going to find 3 volunteers that, with those qualifications, that are actually going to apply for the
Through the chair to Councillor Day, there's a number of people that we already have in mind that we can already reach out to. I think that's probably going to be the best way to approach this rather than through a newspaper advertisement. So we'll be actively seeking out members that have those credentials. And I don't think we'll have a problem with that.
I am thrilled to hear that. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Item number 5, manager's report. I believe we have a couple of updates.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may, I have 2 items. One, just to mention that due to the number of applications, development and reports, we'd like to schedule 2 planning committee meetings a month through September, October and November. So if there's no objection, we'll work with the clerk to put that in place. And the second item, just briefly, I wanted to give you, or just mention the referral that we got recently on the Steveston Streetscape design, and we were asked to look at the bus mall. We were thinking that we might be able to get that to you before the August break, but we really want at a staff level to sit down with TransLink and sort out some of these details with the so-called bus mall and basically get them to land on some of these things that have been floating for years and years and years. So it's not going to be possible to do that before the August break, but so we expect that we will be bringing that back to you in the fall.
Great, thanks for that update. Anything else? All right, we're looking for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you, and we do